When you write Excel formulas, for the most part, you are going to use cell references. And that is a fairly standard way of writing formulas. However, on occasion, you may need to use something else to help people understand the formulas that you are writing. For example, you might have someone who isn't used to using spreadsheets in general, and they really kind of get confused when it comes to figuring out cell references, or maybe it's just that the spreadsheet is so large that using cell references takes quite a bit of time to figure out where are those cells and what's the limit and where do they end and all that kind of thing. So, what you can do instead to help the person who may be reading your Excel spreadsheet and looking at your formulas and trying to understand what they mean, you can use a named range instead. Now, there's one kind of particular thing that we need to look at with that, but named ranges can make a difference between people understanding your formulas and really struggling to understand them. Hi, I'm Terry, one of the Consumer Technology Specialists for Mid-Continent Public Library, and let's look at Excel and using named ranges. As we look at our kind of small example today, we can see that we have a company that has different regions, and as I look at this, we have a Northeast, Southeast, Midwest, Northwest, and Southwest regions. And this is evidently for an entire year because it has numbers for quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4. And what we would like to do is add in the totals here for the different quarters in row 9, but we would also like to get the totals for the different regions in column F. And generally, what we might decide to do is in B9, we might go up to Auto Sum and click on it, and it would try to fill in the cell references for that first column that we want to add. So it'd be equal sum B4 through B8, and certainly that works. But what if we have someone who's going to be looking at this spreadsheet who isn't as familiar with spreadsheets, and you think that really it might help them if instead of using cell references, you use actual names for the data that you are going to be using. In that case, what we can do is select B4 through B8, and we would like to name this range, but we do need to be a little careful. We do know that QTR1, we can't have a space in the name, and we can't start a named range name with a number. So let's go up to the name box and click. And what happens if I just type QTR1, because now I don't have a space? Well, this brings up another really important point when you work with Excel. So let me press enter. And look what it did. At the far right, we have QTR1, row 1. So Excel is so large that sometimes it's easy to try to come up with a named range that in fact is really a cell name. Because here we have QTR 1, 2, 3, and 4, but those are cells. So we need to be a little careful that we don't confuse the issue by using a cell name for a named range. Well, let me go back home. And this time, I still like the idea of using QTR1, but what I'm going to do is select those cells and go to the name box, but I'm going to type QTR and add in an underscore this time, 1. Now the other caution is I definitely need to press enter because you can see I even have a blinking insertion point to the right of the 1. Well, let me press enter. And now that sets that named range into the workings of Excel. Well, let's also then name quarter 2. And we'll do it the same way. Go to the name box and click in it. We'll type QTR underscore 2 and press enter. And now it's a name in the name box. Let's look at quarter 3. I'll click in the name box, type QTR_3, and press enter. And then we have Q4. Go to the name box, QTR_4, and press enter. Now you'll notice that I have a drop-down arrow here on the right-hand side of the name box, so I can click that drop-down and look. These are actually locations now, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. I could click on this QTR_1, for example, and it takes me right to those cells. So the name box, when I type in a cell reference, takes me to the cell reference. If I type in a named range and look at the drop-down list, I can also navigate to a named range. Well, that is pretty slick, isn't it? Well, now let's think about what we can do to get the total for the quarters. Generally, when you want to add a column of numbers, you would go to, in this case, B9, and then go to auto sum, or you might even just say equals sum, and then Excel would try to fill in with the cell references. And that would be B4 through B8. But we have a range name. So in fact, whether I type equals sum in Q1, or I even go to that auto sum button, now that I've named the range, look what happens. It says you want to add the numbers that are in the Q1 range. Now that is really slick, and it is so intuitive compared to even older versions of Excel. Well, yeah, that's what we want to do, so we will press enter, and there's our answer. Now when I click in B9, notice that in my formula bar it actually says sum of Q1, which just maybe makes more sense than sum of B4 through B8. And keep in mind, this is a really small spreadsheet. If you had a really large spreadsheet, that also kind of makes the difference. I don't have to go scrolling down through the spreadsheet to figure out where the end is to make sure that that's all accurate. It's all just right here done for me. The one thing, though, is that then when you use cell references, you would click in B9, find the fill handle, get that skinny plus sign and click and drag across, except look at what happens when we use a name range. Well, let me click in C9 here, and when I look at the formula bar, this is still Q1. And when I look at D9, it's the sum of Q1. So the only thing about using named ranges is that they are absolute references. So we can't use the fill handle to click and drag to copy that formula because, well, it's just the same formula over and over again. So let me remove those three. Although this isn't very difficult either, I simply go to C9 now, go to auto sum, and it says, well, you want to add Q2. I'll press enter. There we go. Now I can go to D9, go to auto sum, and it picks up that this is the sum of Q3, press enter, and then in E9, go to the auto sum button, and again, it's picked up that this is Q4, and I can press enter, and now I have the totals for each one of those quarters. Well, if I can get a total for a quarter, guess what else I can do? I could also get totals for the regions, but before I do that, I need to create named ranges for each of the regions. So let's look at that. Let's start with the Northeast region, which is in row 4, and we're going to select B4 through E4. And again, we're going to name this range the same way that we named the quarter ranges. So I'm going to go up to the name box, click in the name box, and we're going to type in E. And luckily, we can even have just 2 letters for a named range, and it will work. So let's press enter. And then let's also name Southeast, which is B5 through E5, and we'll go back up to the name box and we'll say Southeast, press enter. We'll name Midwest. We'll first of all select B6 through E6 and type MW, press enter. Then we'll select B7 through E7, go to the name box, and this is again Northwest, press enter. And then Southwest is B8 through E8, go to the name box, and Southwest, press enter. We can again go to that drop down arrow that's to the right side of the name box, and look, now we have in alphabetical order Midwest, Northeast, Northwest, and then of course we have the quarters that we created, and then Southeast and Southwest. Well, let's go ahead then, and in F4, starting out, let's put in our total for the Northeast region, and I'm even going to go to Home here and go to AutoSum, and it picks up that I need the sum of Northeast, press enter. Now, I have to remember that I cannot use the fill handle, that I need to compute each of these individually, but that's okay. To calculate a total is an easy process. So we'll go back up to AutoSum. It picks up that that is Southeast, press enter. The next one will go to AutoSum. Now this is kind of interesting because with AutoSum it's saying, oh, so do you want to add the cells above, because the idea of AutoSum, it looks above first and then to the left second. So in this case, we're going to have to disappoint the sum, and we're going to need to actually type in M. Now, as soon as I type the M, I get all sorts of functions here. But as I come down, here is Midwest. And look at that little icon for Midwest. It's showing us that it is a named range. Now we can click on that. And it even in the highlighting shows me what's going to be added. I probably want to end the parentheses there and press enter. Now let's see what happens with Northwest. This is kind of interesting. I can go to AutoSum, and it's going to try to pick up the cell contents above where we're putting in sum, and all we need to do is say, no, that's not what we want to do. We want Northwest, so we'll type an N, and immediately it takes us to the list of N named ranges and functions. So we can see Northeast here. We're going to have to be a little careful. We have to come down till we find in alphabetical order Northwest, but these icons really help you find what you're looking for, and then press enter. And if you have something like this happen, you can always go to the formula bar and just fix it in the formula bar. So then our last different region here is Southwest, and I might even this time just type equals sum, left parenthesis, and then let me type S. And again, it's picked up the Southeast before it picked up the Southwest. Let's see if we can actually get Southwest in here. And I may need to, instead of single clicking, double click. Aha. Now I can end the parentheses and press enter. And so I have very readable formulas yet again. Equals sum Northeast, Southeast, Midwest, Northwest, Southwest. And it just makes it so much easier to read. Again, large spreadsheets for people who may not be familiar with Excel or spreadsheets in general. Named ranges really make a difference. Now let's look at another way to name ranges that may give you a few more options, or if you just like to have a little more control over what you're doing, then this may be something that you would like to do. So first of all, let us go down to the Worksheet tab for Quarter Sales 2, and you'll notice that it's a direct copy of the first worksheet that we saw. So it still has the 5 regions and the 4 quarters, and we would like to create totals. Well, what we can do instead of selecting the cells and going to the name box is that we can go up to the tabs above the ribbon and go to the Formulas tab. And when we go to the Formulas tab, we can see that in the second of the different groups that are on this particular tab, we have defined names with several buttons here that we may want to explore and investigate. The first one being Name Manager, Define Name, Use in Formula, and then even create from a selection. So let's try some of these possibilities now. And first of all, let's just look at the Name Manager and see what we've done so far and how they show up there. So let's click on Name Manager. And look at that. It shows us each one of those items that we have given a name to. It shows you the actual values that are in those cells, and then it tells you its location in the workbook. So this is the quarter sales worksheet, and then what cells are being referenced. And right now it says that the scope is the entire workbook. So no matter how many worksheets I have, I can always refer to any of these range names because the scope is workbook. Now I can change that if I want to. Notice also, if I need to change the cell references within a range, I could go to Edit, and let me click on that. And so right now it tells me that I've selected Midwest. The scope is the workbook, and then down at the bottom it shows me that I have B6 through E6, but maybe I need to make that G6 or something instead. And I can even add a comment if I need to do that. And then, of course, we'll cancel. But that is how I could edit. I can also say we've done away with the Northwest region, and so I may decide that I want to delete that Northwest named range, and I could do that if I wanted to that as well. So there's a lot of help and information just right at your fingertips if you come to the Name Manager. Well, let's close out for a second now that we've talked about that a little bit. And because we do have these other buttons on the right. So the first one is Define Name. So we could again start here with B4 through B8 and define the name. And I can either define the name or apply names. Well, we'll define the name. And it gives us basically the same dialog box that we just saw. But in this case, we're going to call this QTR _1, and then we need to make it slightly different, so I'm just going to call it 1A. What is the scope? Well, it could be the entire workbook. It could be just the one worksheet, quarter sales, or another worksheet, quarter sales 2, or the quarter sales 3. So basically, it's all of the different worksheets that are available, but we'll just say workbook. And then it even gives me a chance to edit the range of this particular named range by coming down here and doing some editing if I need to do that. But we'll say okay. Now we can go through the same process again for QTR2, and we could go back to define the name. And it's a couple more clicks, but depending on what you need to do, it could be precisely what you need to get the answers that you want. So here we have a new name, QTR2A, and we'll click OK. We'll again select these names, define the name, and then this would be QTR _3A, and one more, quarter 4, define the name, and we'll call this QTR _4A, and click OK. Now, when it comes to the totals, notice how it says use in formula. Well, first of all, let's just kind of do a preview of that. So we can click, and it gives us all of the range names that we have created. Oh, so what we can do is this, equals sum, left parens, and then I can go up to the ribbon and select use in formula. And what is the first one? QTR1A. And it puts that name in for me, and then I could put in the right parenthesis if I want to do that. Well, let's do that again. Let's finish out these quarters. So again, I can say equals sum, left parens, use this in a formula, and it's going to be QTR2A. Press enter. Quarter 3 is equals sum, left parenthesis, use in a formula, QTR, that's 3A. Press enter. And really, while the fill handle is perhaps faster, this isn't impossible. It's actually pretty easy to do using the formula, and this is quarter 4A. And press enter. And we have the totals then. As I click in B9 and look at the formula bar, it just says equal sum quarter 1A, quarter 2A, 3A, 4A. And that is how I can definitely define the name and use it in a formula. There is one other button in this defined names group, and that is the Create from Selection. And it's really kind of an interesting choice. You have to be a little more careful when you use it. So Create from Selection, you can automatically generate names from the selected cells. And it has default settings that you may not suspect. So let's create from selection. And it says I can create names from values in the top row, which basically means I could create names from the top row of where I've selected, the left column from where I've selected, the bottom row, or the right column. Let me make sure that I have in fact selected A3 through A9, because let's say that I want to create a named range that's called regions. I can create from selection. It's even saying top row really means the top cell of what you've selected. So it's a little confusing. And then we'll click OK. Now let's look at the name manager, because it's really hard to tell what's going on with that. When we go to the name manager, we can see that we now have a regions named range right here. And here are the items within that named range: Northeast, Southeast, Midwest, etc. And then we can close. That can also be just extremely helpful. Now, here's where it gets kind of interesting. Let's say that we have quarter sales new year. This is a totally blank worksheet. So what I could do is click in A3, and where it says create from selection, remember we have our name manager, I could decide that I want to use in a formula regions. Press enter. Oh my goodness. And it fills in the names of those regions for me. Is that crazy or what? That could really help me very quickly fill in information from another worksheet that I simply maybe want to copy part of that information over here to this new blank worksheet. While you may not use named ranges all the time, I think you can see how they could be very helpful and useful and save you some time and maybe some heartache if you are working with people who don't understand cell references very well. They can be just invaluable in helping you explain the information that is in your spreadsheet so that everyone understands what's going on and how your formulas work in just a very basic way. So when you create your formulas and when you look at the information that's in your spreadsheet, be sure to consider using named ranges. To learn even more, be sure to go to mymcpl.org/online learning for such great resources as Universal Class, Learning Express Library, LinkedIn Learning, and Udemy Business. We also premiere videos every Wednesday and Friday at 1 o'clock. If you miss a video premiere, you'll still be able to find it later when it's convenient for you. You can find us on Facebook at MCPL 360, and you can find us on YouTube by going to our MCPL MO channel.